Did you know that in the original treatment for the Northmen, Alexander Skarsgård's Amleth doesn't go raiding in the land of the Rus, he goes to Scotland. Which makes sense, given that's where Amleth goes in the medieval Nordic folktale the movie is based on. We'll get into it. I'm I.E. Neverday, and at the end of this video, I will be grading 2022's The Northman on its folklorical accuracy. Along the way, we'll learn about Norns, Bjork, Berserkers, and talking heads. No, that's not what We'll also figure out who and or what the different animals in the Northman represent. We'll get to the bottom and top of that creepy tree of dead kings. Oh, and of course we'll take a flight aboard Valkyrie Airlines. But at no point shall I bring up the fact that the Northman and Shakespeare's Hamlet rely on the same source material. Wait. Because at its core, the Northman isn't a Hamlet remake. If anything, it's a remake of Conan the Barbarian. Let's take a look. Hear me, Odin. Summon the story of filmmaker Robert Eggers, who after releasing The Witch and The Lighthouse, came up with an idea for a movie about an archetypal medieval warrior. He was going to call it The Knight. But then David Lowery sort of beat Eggers to the punch, backswing, on that one when he put out The Green Knight in 2021. So Eggers went to Iceland, was impressed with the landscape as many of us are, and bada bing bada boom, his archetypal knight became an archetypal Viking. The Icelandic poet Sjón, co-writer of 2021's Lamb, helped bring this new vision to life, which was probably a good call because, as Eggers told Forbes ahead of the film's debut, quote, "It's a good idea to make a Viking movie right now. 5 or 10 years ago, people would not have gone for it. I was personally not interested in Vikings. I wasn't interested in Vikings as a kid," end quote. Actually, I don't think that was a bad position for Eggers and his crew to start from when they set out to recreate the Viking Age in a way that was both accurate to history and accurate to folklore and superstition. As Eggers himself explained, quote, "We worked with archaeologists and historians trying to recreate the minutiae of the physical world while also attempting to capture, without judgment, the inner world of the Viking mind, their beliefs, mythology, and ritual life. That would mean the supernatural would be as realistic as the ordinary in this film, for so it was for them," end quote. That is a very elegant way of saying that The Northman is a bit of a fantasy film. And while some audience members allegedly walked out of theaters upon discovering that there was more to The Northman than just dudes smashing each other with swords, this genre of action/art film isn't anything new. Just look at original recipe Conan the Barbarian from 1982. While ostensibly a sword and sorcery film, it's also a bit of a meandering, philosophical, trippy meditation on life and death, dude. And in my opinion, the film is all the better for it. The Northman falls into the same camp. And notably, it opens the exact same way as Conan the Barbarian, with a voiceover by a wizard invoking a deity, followed by a boy watching the execution of his father, followed by a vow to seek revenge and a visit to a witch, and a visit to a he-witch, or wizard, who is also the narrator, and the taking of a special sword from a dead guy, and the falling in love with a spirited blonde woman. Yeah, turns out there are a lot of similarities between Conan and the Northman. But to be clear, this isn't plagiarism. I mean, for starters, the story the Northman is based on was around 4 centuries before Robert E. Howard created his Conan character. But more importantly, Eggers is deliberately telling an archetypal warrior story here. So there are certain beats and themes that are going to overlap. Revenge, feats of strength, special weapons, guidance from gods or elders. That being said, it's also clear that Eggers relied on a specific medieval story to fill in the details of his characters and narrative. The Life of Amleth was first published by the 12th century Danish historian Saxo Grammaticus in his famed Latin language work, Gesta, Danorum, Deeds of the Danes. It's been argued that there is or was an older Icelandic poem out there upon which Saxo Grammaticus must have based his Latin account, but alas, this Icelandic original remains a hypothetical. Overall, The Northman is fairly faithful to Grammaticus's version of the tale. In that version, Amleth pretends to be dumb or inept for the majority of the proceedings while secretly plotting his revenge and working out acts of deception. He infamously edits a royal decree that results in his captor monsters being executed rather than himself. The Northman's interpretation of this scene, which isn't something I want to show here, doesn't follow the original story to a T, but the heart of the matter is there. Amleth is pretending to be something that he isn't so he can get his revenge and strategically remove obstacles along his way. The real deviation in the Northman from its source material comes in the form of geography, because Amleth in the medieval story never goes to the land of the Rus, Ukraine, but he does go to Scotland. As Eggers told the Rap, quote, "I had lunch with Alex Skarsgård, he was looking for something else, and I said, just to let you know, I have an idea for a Viking movie, which I didn't really have. But then I went away and created the Northman with the Icelandic novelist and poet Sjón. The second chapter in the original treatment was supposed to take place in Scotland, and Alex suggested that we go east. And so now we have chapter 2 in ancient Ukraine." End quote. The Vikings, of course, famously raided and kidnapped the Gaelic/Celtic Celtic-speaking peoples of Scotland and Ireland and brought them to Iceland, where the two cultures, Norse and Gaelic, intermingled. Something I talked about in my video on the 2026 Irish folk horror film, Hokum. So it stinks that Eggers may have had to sacrifice this detail in order to appease his lead actor. Then again, it might be that Skarsgård, being of the Swedish persuasion, knows a thing or two about Vikings. Note, he for sure does. And perhaps his suggestion to send his character to the land of the Rus was meant to be a tip of the helmet to what is arguably the greatest Viking movie of all time, 1999's The 13th Warrior. Because these dudes in The 13th Warrior are Rus Vikings, also known as the Vålva Vikings, who historically began navigating and settling along the banks of the Volga River in the 8th century. Regardless, the Northman is a very different type of Viking movie. The polar opposite, in a way. Whereas the 13th Warrior attempts to ground the supernatural elements of the Old English Beowulf saga in the historical Viking Age, reimagining monsters and a water woman and a dragon as flesh and blood humans, the Northman takes a fairly grounded tale of courtly intrigue and murder and sets it in the folklorical Viking Age, which is rife with berserkers, Norns, and Valkyries. Granted, the historicity of berserkers is up for debate. What's not up for debate is that in the Old Norse sources, the berserker is portrayed as a Norse warrior who adopts the temperament of an animal on the battlefield and during raids. To quote Skarsgård, "My character is a Viking berserker, and his animal is a hybrid of a wolf and a bear. And it's this ritual that they go through before a raid of a village, and it was about shedding your humanity in a way, letting go of your humanity and turning into a beast. So tapping into a more atavistic, more animalistic state." End quote. Wait a minute, did he say wolf and bear? It's just funny because the name Beowulf likely means bee-wolf, which scholars have interpreted as a kenning for bear, because bees make honey, so what's a wolf that eats honey? A bear. It's like a little riddle, which is precisely the point of a kenning. And who remembers Skarsgård's berserker name in the Northman? Anyone? Anyone? That's right, it's Bjorn Ulfur, Beowulf. Is this a nod to Beowulf? Probably, because we know Eggers turned to the Beowulf saga for inspiration for Willem Dafoe's character, Hymir the Fool. And I quote, "The fool that Dafoe plays has his origins in a priestly character in Old Norse and Anglo-Saxon culture, and, in Beowulf, a character who seems to be a mixture of a court jester and a keeper of sacred scripts. That's how we use Dafoe in the film." End quote. Then again, bears and wolves were amongst the 3 primary animals berserkers were thought to have imitated or embodied, the third being boars, and I'd be remiss not to mention that the word berserker likely translates to bear shirt. Because like all macho warrior men, these dudes loved their furs. I actually took a deeper dive into the bear flavor of berserker and its most famous representative, the legendary Bodvar Bjarki, in my video on 2019's Midsummer. But where was I? Bears? Beowulf? No. Berserkers? Björk. The Icelandic avant-garde superstar Björk came out of acting retirement to play the Seeress, aka the Slav witch, in The Northman. She's the one who reminds Amleth, aka Bjorn Ulfur, quote, "You cannot escape what fate the Norns have spun." In Norse mythology, the Norns are a trio of female fate weavers who perform their prophetic work at the base of the world tree Yggdrasil. More on that in a minute. And the Seeress in The Northman is looking a bit Nornish herself. She's literally pulling thread in her hands, animals. Those details aside, Bjork's Seeress is representative of a figure that we find in Iron Age Norse tradition, the Vålva, a female shaman whose name translates literally to staff bearer. And if you're thinking to yourself, yeah, I'm sure this version here with the headdress and the cowrie shells is your typical Hollywood nonsense, way over the top. Wait until you take a gander at how the 13th century saga of Eric the Red describes a local Vålva. Quote, "She had a blue mantle over her, with strings for the neck, and it was inlaid with gems quite down to the skirt. On her neck she had glass beads, on her head she had a black hood of lambskin, lined with ermine. A staff she had in her hand, with a knob thereon. It was ornamented with brass, and inlaid with gems round about the knob. Around her she wore a girdle of soft hair, or belt of touchwood, and therein was a large skin bag, in which she kept the talismans needful to her in her wisdom." End quote. It's also important to note that in the medieval sagas, Vålva was often used interchangeably with Seiðkona when referring to witches or seeresses. Seiðkona translates to something like female practitioner of Seiðr, Seiðr being a form of Old Norse magic that dealt with fate and the future. Which means, yes, presumably the he-witch who gets Hamer the Fool's severed head to tell Amleth where to find the magic sword Draugr is also a practitioner of Seiðr. Notably, the he-witch invokes the Norse allfather Odin, which makes sense given that in the Norse poem Lokasenna, part of the Poetic Edda, Loki accuses Odin of using Seiðr. Apparently practicing this type of magic carried connotations of being unmanly, because real men don't care about the future. Anyway, Odin is also an accurate choice here, folklorically speaking, for another reason. He used to carry around a severed head belonging to a one Mr. Mimir who had gained divine knowledge after drinking from a magic well via a magic horn. In the Heimskringla, Odin embalms Mimir's head with herbs, speaks an enchantment, and thus creates the first personal computer. Or at least the head shares cosmic wisdom and serves as Odin's counsel. Now, did Eggers and Sjón have all of this Norse mythology in mind when they wrote their he-witch scene? Or was this fool's head-in-hand monologue intended to be a wink and a nod to Hamlet, in which the titular Prince of Denmark famously has an existential crisis while holding the skull of the late court jester Yorick? Maybe it's both, because it's clear this film respects its Odin lore. Case in point, remember when King Orvandil quizzes Amleth on how Odin lost his eye? Amleth's answer? To learn the secret magic of women. This appears to be a direct reference to Seiðr, the prophetic magic Odin learned after drinking from the aforementioned Mimir's magic well, back when the wise man's head was still attached to his body. As the story goes, Odin traded one of his eyes in return for a swig of that wisdom water. Odin's ravens, Huginn and Muninn, are also well represented in the film. In Norse mythology, these birds are effectively Odin's Midgard reconnaissance team. Of course, the ravens have a second meaning as well, since Amleth's dad, Orvandil, is nicknamed the War Raven. As for the vixen or female fox, it's possible that's meant to be a fylgja, which in Nordic folklore is a spirit who leads people to their fates and/or follows them to their deaths. They can appear as any number of animals, but are thought to reflect the inner natures of the people to which they attach themselves. The appearance of a fox fylgja for Amleth suggests that A, he is untamed, which, yeah, that checks out, and B, that he is cunning and deceitful, which, again, that's the plot. A warrior pretending to be something that he's not in order to exact his revenge. He's playing the long game, and doing his best to honor the legacy of his family tree. A tree that he actually gets to see. The obvious layup interpretation here is that the Tree of Kings is Yggdrasil, the tree that holds the 9 realms together. The tree that is the gallows upon which Odin famously sacrifices himself to himself. So when you see all of those kings hanging there, yeah, it gives Yggdrasil vibes, but for my money, this isn't Yggdrasil. I think that is what we're seeing later, perhaps, but here with all the kings, this is clearly a Nordic guardian tree, or care tree. In Swedish, they call it vartrad. In Norwegian, it's a tuntre. Basically, it's a deciduous tree that a family plants in the center of the yard, where it comes to represent the family's fate or luck. Some people believed that spirits inhabited the trees and watched over families, and thus offerings were needed to keep those spirits happy. And I'd bet my bottom hack silver that Eggers and/or his co-writer Sjón were familiar with the temple at Uppsala in Sweden, where animals and human beings were infamously offered up to the gods. And I mean literally offered up. they hung people from the trees. Speaking of trees and sticks, best segue ever, what's up with that stick and ball game that looks a heck of a lot like the ancient Gaelic sport hurling, which is still popular in Ireland to this day? Welp, that's Nautilker, literally ball game, as described in the 13th and 14th century sagas of Icelanders. It's likely that the Vikings borrowed the basics of this game from Gaelic peoples in Scotland and Ireland, then brought it to Iceland. Because as we've already established, there was a rich history of cultural exchange between ancient Gaels and ancient Icelanders, which resulted primarily from Vikings kidnapping Gaelic women. But to me, this Nautilker/hurling scene, while compelling, further highlights how much it stinks that Eggers changed his original story treatment. We were supposed to get more Gaelic culture in this movie, because Amleth was supposed to go to Scotland, just as he does in the medieval life of Amleth. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, that means Anya Taylor-Joy's character Olga, Ophelia in Hamlet, would have had to be Scottish, and she doesn't look Scottish. She is Scottish, ancestrally speaking. A little bit anyway. To be clear, my beef here isn't that Eggers dared to change something from the source material, it's that it's a bad change. Naming Nicole Kidman's character Queen Gudrun, for example, was a good change. In the original story, she's Garutha, which Shakespeare changed to Gertrude for Hamlet. Gudrun is a great choice here because in Norse mythology, Gudrun is the wife of the hero Sigurd, who famously slays a dragon with a magic sword. What's more, as a result of Gudrun's scheming, her husband Sigurd is murdered by his brother-in-law. Side note, it's clear to me now that in 1985's Red Sonja, the villainous Queen Gedrun derives her name from the same mythical source, something I completely missed when doing my research for that video. Another change that makes sense here is redubbing Amleth's conniving uncle Fang, Claudius in Hamlet, Fjolnir. Etymologically, Fjolnir potentially means something like the hidden or concealed one. Folklorically, King Fjolnir was a descendant of the gods and the founder of the Yngling dynasty, which famously held power where? Uppsala, Sweden. Robert Eggers, you son of a Valkyrie. Finally, let's talk about the film's Valkyrie. No, those aren't braces. Turns out some Vikings used to make horizontal grooves in their front teeth and fill them with resin. The reason? Scariness. My bigger initial issue with the Northman's depiction of the Valkyrie was having her transport a still-alive Amleth, which doesn't seem like something Valkyries did, until I looked into it. And lo and behold, in the Vålsunga saga, the Valkyrie Brynhilda gives rides to our old pal, the Norse hero Sigurd. Also, turns out Amleth probably just imagined that part because when Amleth comes to in that hot spring and is like, this isn't Valhalla, i.e. Valhalla, Olga responds, I didn't carry you that far. Then Amleth and Olga board a ship for where? The Orkney Islands. And where are the Orkney Islands? Off the coast of Scotland. Do we ever see Amleth get there? No, he jumps off the freaking boat. That settles it. In regards to its folklorical accuracy grade, the Northman is getting an A-. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment, "Hear me, Odin." If you want to vote on the topic of my next video, make sure you are subscribed to the Folklore in Film channel and that notifications are turned on. As always, my name is I.E. Neverday, editor of the Celtic fantasy short story anthology Neon Druid. Thanks for coming out. Hear me, Odin.